Is it on? Okay. Okay, we will start now. Ist nur meins. Warte mal kurz. Okay. Okay. So, welcome everyone to tonight's edition of Loops here in the Alte Lesesaal of the TU Berlin. Loops is our ongoing conversation series within the Design and Computation Master's Program here at the UDK and TU Berlin, which is part of the new practice framework supported by the Berlin University Alliance and the project Zukunft of the State of Berlin. My name is Simon Nickisch. I'm a master's student here in Design and Computation, and I will be guiding you through this evening's conversation together with my co-host Nick. Today's session is called Future to Storytelling as Methodological Practice and Artistic Encounter. Tonight we will explore how storytelling can become a way of engaging with futures, not as fixed predictions or simple binaries, but as spaces for speculation, negotiation, and shared imagination. This conversation isn't about utopias or dystopias, but about the rich and complex in-between where future narratives are formed, questioned, and reimagined. We'll begin with a brief introduction round from our guests, followed by inputs from each of them. In the final part of today's session, the conversation will open up and every one of you will have a chance to ask their own questions and give their own inputs. The loop in front of us will guide us through this evening. It will kind of signal us when each phase ends. And afterwards, we'd love to invite all of you to the bar to continue the conversation in a more informal way. So, welcome.
Yeah, hi, my name is Nick Roffeis. I'm also a student at Design and Computation in the same semester as Timo. And I would like to introduce you to tonight's panelists, starting with Isabella Hermann, Jonny-Bix Bongers, and Markus Kreutzer. And we will start our conversation with some input from Markus Kreutzer, who is a designer and researcher at the Urban Complexity Lab at the Fachhochschule Potsdam. He teaches strategic design at the HFG Schwäbisch Gmünd, and his work focuses on systematic transformation, now it works again, cheers, and future-oriented design practices. He works across design research, future studies, and socio-ecological discourses. We'll have some 10-15 minute input by Markus, and then we'll have a brief question round, and then continue with the next speaker. So, thank you, Markus. And over to you.
Cool. Yes, let's see if that works. Yes, okay. So yeah, thanks for the invitation. Loops are actually like a very central part to my work, specifically feedback loops, and you will see several of them in the presentation. So what I want to talk about is called linguistic preconfiguration of computational narration. So basically, the idea of how language preconfigures everything that we do when we create narratives together with computers, basically. Well, wait a second. No. Nope. That's the loop. I have to stick with the first slide for the entire talk. Well, we can skip that because you've already introduced me. Shall I wait? No? Okay. Just a quick, for some further introduction, basically one of the current projects that I'm working on is about exploring social and legal implications of reality-forming interfaces. Basically, considering the question, what happens if physical and digital spaces merge and fundamentally shape our perception of reality? And this is like a current project that is about to end, and I'm going into a new project soon, which is about digital literacy in schools. There should be a slide about that, but I just continue talking. Sorry.
That looks good.
No, this, okay. Yeah, so that's the upcoming project. So I'm basically like in a transition from one project to another one currently. Then I also published, this is one of my recent publications, focusing on designerly reproduction in the Design Abilities Design Research Journal. And I have an ongoing course, as you said, I teach in the Strategic Design Master in Schwäbisch Gmünd, which focuses on deconstructing designerly visions, basically transformation of mental frameworks in the design process of the designer, but also in the context that the designer attempts to address. So it's an inner and an outer transformation somehow. Then what I often do is publish these kinds of models, which I consider as visualizations of, let's say, artistic explorations, but also conceptual explorations of my own emerging thoughts. So if you follow me on social media, you might have seen some of them there. This one is called the Imagination Cone, and it's basically a constructivistic perspective of the futures cone, which many of you might know. But it's just to give you a hint of that and as an introduction. Then all the thoughts I would like to share now are thoughts in progress, and I don't feel completely comfortable with all of them yet. It's for me also like emergent learning and emergent thinking. But let's start. Basically, I think that most current design practices, like really in practice, operate within dominant worldviews, mostly economic digital worldviews. And I think that design should increasingly navigate a shift from dominant worldviews to alternative worldviews. And not just that, I think design should also support the manifestation of these alternative worldviews on several layers. On a linguistic level, which I will focus on today, but also on a narrative layer, which I will also touch, but then also on a structural and material level. And I think, and that's why it's visualized like that, that linguistics is also the root of many other things like narrative structures and material conditions. And so linguistics, or language in general, is something to address for shifting these worldviews, I believe. So I think there are like three main questions that I would like to address. The first one is, how does thinking and language relate to each other? The second one is, how does language pre-configure computational narratives and like the process of creating narratives with the support of computers? And then, how could linguistic pre-configuration enable new computational narratives? Basically shift, like the shift that I've mentioned, like a pre-configuration. Okay, let's start with the first question. How does thinking and language relate to each other? Consider this as your social, physical reality you're embedded in. Now, within this reality, you make certain experiences. You absorb these experiences through your sensory organs, and you interpret these experiences against the backdrop of prior experiences. And out of this emerges a mental model or a generative model, what Clark says, and that you project onto reality. I think language sits somehow in between your relationship, in the relationship between you and reality and the world. Oops, I'm back. So yes, I think that language is to some extent the thought structuring interface between humans and their world. It represents and forms relationships with all living and non-living systems. And by doing so, it produces and preserves, and of course, reproduces worldviews. It frames perceptions and creates differentiations. And as I said, in that way, it sort of pre-configures everything, at least everything that we're able to perceive. This is probably like the most famous quote everyone has heard this one, the limits of my language mean the limits of my world, which is basically, yeah, I think the most precise sort of way of articulating this thought. Just to show you some examples, human being is basically the dominant, the common framing of a human entity, and it represents kind of like a static perspective worldview of the human. And you can have this, but you can also speak about a human becoming, having a more processual worldview of the human. Then, one more example, you can speak about user experience, but you can also speak about human experiences, and this, I think, already fundamentally changes how you address the design of technological systems. You can speak about natural resources or human resources, but you can also speak about natural foundation, which is also quite a different framing. You can speak about artificial intelligence, giving like a machine human-like characteristics, or like, let's say, living system-like characteristics. Or you can speak about automated pattern recognition, and yeah, these are different framings that they change a lot. So I think the question is, what are actually possibilities to intervene into existing vocabularies? There are several approaches. Consider like there is a vocabulary, that's the vocabulary that is dominant in your language. You can remove an existing word, and I think most people would agree that it's a good idea to remove racist vocabulary, for example. Then you can add a new word, maybe like take two words, combine them into one to create more differentiation, or construct a completely new term for something that you think you're observing. And when you observe new phenomena or construct new things, or often the thing that is done to represent a concept is to invent a new term. Then you can change the meaning of a word. You can adapt the form of a word, for example, from human being to human becoming. If you want to go further, you can go from human becoming to human interbecoming, sort of like seeing the human as interrelated within the web of life. And you can introduce an unacknowledged word, which might exist in one community or one context, but certainly not in the one you're embedded in. And of course, all this is, let's say, it shouldn't be defined, and it's rather a proposal, like a design, a possibility that you propose out of which a discourse can emerge, and through this discourse, then vocabularies might change. And this is also, I think, the process how this usually happens. Now the question: how does language pre-configure computational narratives? This is, I would say, the basic interface, how you use most computational tools, specifically generative AI. You have an input field, so you put text, the words you're framing into this, and by doing so, already sort of frame and shape the output that this will generate. But of course, it's not just the input field, it's also the training data, and of course, the models and how they're designed. Sorry, I will hurry up. So, taking this at the root, language is at the root. Language pre-configures training data and then the input into these input fields, and this produces computational narratives. And these computational narratives have a feedback loop to language, and I would argue that we're sort of often trapped within a specific worldview through such feedback loops. Sounds a bit like algorithmic bias, yes, but I think there's a fundamental difference. Language produces biases, and biases manifest through language. Biases are a symptom of specific linguistic categorizations. I think without these categorization, specific like biases wouldn't be possible, and they are inaccuracies within a dominant worldview. Now, as I said, I think this shift from a dominant to an alternative worldview is important. And I think this matters because these dominant worldviews need radical but thoughtful innovation because their feedback loops increasingly destabilize their own existence. And we feel this everywhere. I won't go into detail here, but just look at the dominant economic worldviews and how the externalities they produce create a feedback onto their own worldview and existence. Okay, last question, I hurry up. How could linguistic repreconfiguration enable new computational narratives? Just a few proposals. This model you've seen already. I think what we need is some kind of linguistic innovation, similar, or through the methodology and model that I've just showed. And I think we can do this in several ways. There could be a reflective curation of training data. You can have critical, maybe even suggestive questions in prompt engineering when you engage with machines, when you interface them, that basically make you reflect why you put certain words into this thing and why not others. And then the creation and distribution of linguistic innovation, I think, is very important, as I said. Last thing. What are the effects of that? Why does this matter? I think this is important because it affects individual mental transformation. So on a micro level, this affects the individual. And on a macro level, I think through the mediation of technology, new societal narratives that represent these worldview shifts could emerge, and then technological system transformation basically as sort of the intervention in between the individual and societal narratives. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Markus Kreutzer. Any brief and urgent questions from the audience before we continue? Yeah?
Maybe not a question, but I have an observation, because when you showed the spiral from how was it, linguistic innovation to what was the second one? Narrative, structural, material. Then
the first one, or right in the beginning, the spiral, linguistic, exactly. Narrative, structural, material.
Then I was wondering, what are the agents in there? For example, where do designers appear? They probably appear in the material realm, the structures, maybe also in the narratives, maybe also and then I was thinking linguistics as well. But then with your last slides, there was also this loop, because linguistics became like a structural dimension because of the computation in there, right? And then there is again maybe this point where designers can intervene and transform design and modulate linguistics again. Do you think, or where's art, for example, in this realm?
Art?
Art in the spiral.
Good question. I'm not an artist, so I'm not sure if I can answer this. Or science. Good question. I mean, I think science is in all of these layers, and just thinking about design, I think design always works with existing knowledge, with science to some extent. I think you couldn't create products without knowing certain physical conditions, for example, like material products or computational systems or whatever. So I think science always plays a role there. And I think, just to go back to your first thing, I think that design should actually when you think in design disciplines somehow, the material level, you could think about, I don't know, I would locate an interface designer, an interaction designer, maybe a classic industrial design within this field. Narrative would be more communication, structural could be organizational design, stuff like that. Linguistics, I think their language, it's not so, let's say, common within the design space. But I think it's critically important to address this as well.
Maybe one thought to that. You made this very nice example of whether we say user experience or human experience. I think this is something that directly influences how we approach a design task. When we, I don't know, design an interface for the next app, I think it does change something in the perception we have about in the end, the users, and there is a good point to make why we call it user design, because it makes it easier to separate between different groups. But the human aspect sometimes maybe gets lost, and that's why we have very cluttered and TikTok-like overstimulating UI designs sometimes. So I think this is something where linguistics directly has an influence on design.
Yeah, exactly. Would agree on that.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Or inputs? We will also come to a bigger discussion around later on.
Absolutely. I'll keep my questions for the end.
Okay.
Yeah, you sure?
I want to know, like, when you talk about dominant language, you say, like, or dominant perspectives, I don't know how you call it, but how the personalization of language for each user changes, maybe in your view, the dominant kind of, because like when you are like interacting with chat or chatbots or whatever, like you're being, this language is being personalized specifically to you. So whether, how it influences these dominant narratives, in your view.
But I think it might even create more of an internal sort of like feedback loop that is more related to the individual and less to, let's say, shared understanding or shared language, shared. Yes.
Wonderful. Yeah, then I would say thanks again, Markus Kreutzer. Warm applause. And then I would like to introduce more in detail Isabella Hermann, who is a political scientist active in both academic and public discourse with a focus on science fiction and techno-political futures. She uses speculative narratives as analytical tools to explore how we think about AI, climate, governance, and societal change. She advocates for science fiction as a critical lens, not an escape. And with that, I will pass the word to you. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Warm
Thanks for the invitation and the nice introduction. So I will talk now about my new book, which is about anti-dystopias. Now, exclamation mark. And yeah, I will start now actually with dystopias because they are quite in vogue nowadays. And that is true for fiction and reality. And because dystopias as a cultural genre, they show what we fear in extreme form. So, for example, post-apocalyptic science fiction, for example, or techno-dystopian futures like Black Mirror, or also democratic backlash and stuff like that. So we find that in science fiction, and of course this is a mirror of what we are experiencing right now. And this could be actually an alarm clock or a warning signal to act right now. But of course it can also be pure entertainment, which is also of course absolutely fine. But dystopias also reflect kind of hopelessness, or fatalism, resignation, or even absolution or a catharsis. Because, you know, when I'm sitting cozy on my sofa and watch Black Mirror, for example, which just started in its 7th season 2 weeks ago, then you see kind of, oh my God, it's a total disaster, but, you know, I'm still cozy and I lived through the disaster, and then maybe it's actually fine. But more or less, the cultural critique kind of sees dystopias as a reflection of radical pessimism. So I'm not sure if I agree totally to that, but this is kind of one interpretation of that. So, but the counterpart, utopias, aren't trendy anymore. And at this moment, I'd like to say the artwork is actually from a collage artist, which is called Laura Voss, and it's just awesome what she does, I think. So this always reminds me of Handmaid's Tale. I don't know why, but it has this flavor. So utopias are out, aren't trendy anymore. And what are utopias actually? So they signify a perfect society, but actually a perfect society that is not reachable. And if you have this perfect society, for example, in a science fiction novel, soon it becomes exclusive and elitist or even totalitarian. And this is also true for fiction and reality, because also in reality we have this huge utopian political projects in the 20th and even 21st century, which totally gone wrong. So if you think about Nazi Germany, this was an utopia for the Nazis. If you think about communism or even neoliberalism, so this kind of political utopia, which then became really, really anti-utopian. So, I mean, the word still exists, and there is still like this demand that we need more utopias, but the term per se is problematic and controversial nowadays, I'd say. So how can we overcome this, I'd say, dichotomy between utopia and dystopia, which is, as I said, the historical burden of utopia, or the gap between this perfect, unreachable utopia and the imperfect reality, and the negativity of the dystopia that surrounds us right now. So, and there is a trend I see in science fiction, also with these new genres, partly climate change, but also solar punk, also queer science fiction. So there is a new genre evolving between utopia and dystopia, which I call anti-dystopia. And it's not only a genre, actually, it can be a narrative and also an analytical concept. So what it is about, in a nutshell, so anti-dystopias do have their beginnings in the catastrophes of the Anthropocene. So we're not, 1,000 years in outer space. We are in a near future where we have climate change, where we have political democratic backlashes and so forth. But these dystopias, or actually not yet dystopias, catastrophes, are characterized by people resisting dystopia with justice, fair communities, and change and transformation. And even more important, anti-dystopias are inherently contradictory and imperfect. So they're always developing. We cannot reach utopia. There will always be a fight against dystopia. Then just some examples. Actually, my reference book is Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry for the Future, because maybe some of you know it. It was out 2020, and it was largely discussed, not only in the science fiction community, but also in communities of activism, also in the cultural sphere. And in fact, so the climate activist Bill McKibben, in a review, called it anti-dystopian. He called it an anti-dystopian novel. And I read this interview, and I read this review, and then I heard an interview with Kim Stanley Robinson, and this word, anti-dystopian, immediately catched me. So I was really fascinated by that, because it doesn't exist yet, right? And Kim Stanley Robinson, in an interview, said himself, so it's not a utopian novel because they haven't solved the problems, but have resisted dystopia. And I think this captured it also very well. So, we cannot build a perfect future, but maybe a better one, or at least not a worse one. And then, so this is my reference work, and then I have 8 other novels. And I have also right now quotations of the authors. So one other work I see as anti-dystopian, which is the oldest, in fact, is A Parable of the Sawyer by Octavia Butler. And I won't dive deep into the story right now, but Octavia Butler says about her protagonist, Lauren. She has this destiny in mind for humanity, the destiny of Earthseed, which is the name of her religion, is to take root among the stars. And whether you take that literally or figuratively, you're going to make yourself better. And the parable of the sawyer is really a brutal world, and also the protagonists, which are actually good people or good characters, they have also to kill people, and it's really, really awful, but still they try to make it better and build a fair community. So another one which I see is anti-dystopian is Cory Doctorow. He's not only a science fiction author, but also a tech activist, and yeah, quite renowned in that as well. And yeah, in his book, also a dystopia and a group of people, the walkaways, they just walk away, as the title says, and try to build fairer communities. And what Cory Doctorow says about his work, Walkaway is an optimistic disaster novel, which I think is also a very nice other term for anti-dystopia. And he says, disasters are things you get whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. What really matters is not whether you have disasters, but what happens after them. Does the disaster become a catastrophe? Do people take it as a signal to unleash their bestial nature? Or is it the moment where people rise to the occasion to see how they can help? And yeah, I think again, this really captures the spirit of the book. Another one is Station 11, which is also a wonderful series. So if you have enough of Black Mirror or other dystopias, I could really recommend Station 11. It's also, of course, a dystopian setting because we are 20 years in the future and a virus killed like 99% of humanity, but still they try to find hope and also be comforted in aesthetics and art. So it is really about the beauty of art as well. And what Emily St. John Mandel says about her book is, it's a story where civilization collapses, but our humanity persists. So isn't that wonderful? And a last one of a German science fiction author X, actually, Proxy. So it's kind of end times utopia. And there also, it's very digital. It's also about virtual realities. There is a apocalypse because a virus kills the virtual reality where people actually live in, and then they have to go to like the desert, a dead landscape, to find the servers and make the virtual reality come to life again. And what Eike says, so this is a German quote, but I translated it into, or I let it translate into English. The characters are hopeful and act optimistically. They don't give up, even when they experience resistance. Even when something goes wrong, when we are in the middle of the poly crisis in the surreal poly world. So these are one of the 4 of the other 8 novels I analyze as anti-dystopian, and these are the other 4. So you see also it's a quite diverse mix. We have also Sarah Hall and Eci Condé, and another German one, Lisa J. Krieg and Nedi Okorafor. And it was important for me to have a diverse setup of science fiction novels from like all over the world, and have also different genders. But still it was not hard for me to find those different novels, because I think the anti-dystopian storyline is really reflected in queer science fiction, in Latinx science fiction, in African science fiction, in Afrofuturismus, and all those different genres. So I think it's like inherently rather progressive and challenging the status quo. So this is the idea of my book with the works I analyze. So, but I find references in films and series, for example, Pomsey or Vesper or Beats of the Southern Wild, which I think have also this anti-dystopian twists, or also newer ones like For All Mankind, more or less, The Kitchen or The Last of Us. There you can find this kind of storylines. And I will end now with, kind of put it in a nutshell, what anti-dystopia can also mean beyond literally and film works. Anti-dystopian thinking focuses on active resistance against negative futures while acknowledging the complexity and imperfection of human society. And, this is also real or true for the here and now. And you don't have to be in a powerful office, I think, to act anti-dystopian. You can do that in your university. You can do that in your kids, in your neighborhood. So I think it's also a really empowering concept because it's an attitude. It's a mode of thinking. And, in that way, I'm interested what your opinion is on that, and I'm looking forward to the discussion, and thanks.
Pleasure. Thank you so much. Any comments, urgent questions from the audience? Yeah?
Thank you for this talk. I really enjoyed it. I was wondering regarding like anti-dystopias, would you also argue that utopias are kind of needed for society? Because like I feel like this might be a current situation where in like avoiding the dystopia for what? And kind of like I think many people are like, oh, we're doomed anyways, so like avoid this for what? Like what's the thing to work for, or the thing to avoid, kind of, if that makes sense.
So I'm not sure if I got your question right. So you mean like if we need a positive vision, an utopian positive vision, or? I'm not sure if I got the core of the question.
The thing is like, my question was like, if we also need utopias or not just like the anti-dystopia in order to like have something to work for, because in the past utopias have been kind of, in my opinion, a driving force also for society, and I feel like that's kind of gone missing now, like the utopias in general. Yeah, okay.
Thanks, now I got it. So, of course, so this kind of presentation is, of course, kind of polemic. I'm not dogmatic, and I'm not against utopias. And I have a lot of friends, colleagues working in future studies or in critical future studies. And there's also a concept which is called real-utopien, reality utopias, maybe. And this is pretty close to anti-dystopias. So there is an exchange. So, but I think anti-dystopia is not only working against something, because you need to have to work against the negativity. You need to have actually a positive idea of where you want to go. So to say, I'm working against racism, then actually it kind of implies a positive idea or more, optimistic idea of where I want to go. But but it's not absolutely mutual exclusive. So I think that utopias and anti-dystopias can absolutely work hand in hand.
Wonderful. Any more comments? All right.
Maybe one last thing. Where can we buy the new book?
Yeah, good question.
Oh, okay, so I put also some postcards on the bar. You can take the postcard because the artwork is also so wonderful. And yeah, you can, of course, the publisher has it, Ökom, but also all major platforms. But please go to your bookstore in your neighborhood. And I have actually three books with me, so if I need to buy one, I have 3 with me, but every bookstore, and please go to your local one.
We will all do that afterwards.
Awesome, yeah, hit the bookstores. All right, then, yeah, of course.
I wanted to ask you, because you say like you can apply this anti-dystopia wherever you are, in a way, like if you are in your university. And I was thinking about this sentence about it's easier to imagine the end of the world instead of the end of capitalism, like whether like our own behaviors should also change towards like this kind of like possibility of not being too destructive.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for the comment. And yeah, and it's also, it's always worth it, you know? This is also, I think, the spirit of the idea. Also, if we say we can rather imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. So capitalism is there, it's a system, we cannot change it, it's so strong structurally, but sure, you can do something, you can act differently, which is not to say that we don't have to change the system. This is true, but I think you can really have like the thinking that you can act against it, as small as it might be.
Wonderful. Then warm applause for Isabella. Thank you so much. Yeah, then we would like to continue with our last speaker for tonight, would be Jonny-Bix Bongers. Jonny is a researcher, curator, and artist from Berlin. He's interested in narratives of emerging technology and multimedia storytelling. He creates events, transdisciplinary research, and new media. He explores the role of the body, perception, and digital environments in constructing experiential futures. Additionally, he is also an alumni of this program, Designing Computation. So thanks for joining us. And yeah, I give the word to you. Thank you so much.
Does it work? Oh yeah, perfect. Oh, I do have like this room thing again. Shall we change the microphone maybe? Oh, does it work?
Sure.
I think it's better here. Yeah, thank you. There's an additional tab open. I think it's, yeah, no, go back to the slide before. Yeah, I think this one. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks so much for the invitation. I'm so happy being here and also with this wonderful guests. And I will dive. So my approach is like a more practical one, and I was thinking about more where narration, storytelling, and future thinking is maybe embedded in my work. I work kind of differently, and I started in theater actually, so I do come from performance art, and this is a piece that we did at the Münchner Kammerspiele in 2019, and it called Werther's Quest for Love, and it was a performance where an actor was sitting in his room and was interacting with his computer, and the inlay from the computer is like projected on the different screens, and the audience could walk around this performance. And also there we were thinking about how actually the body and also humans are interacting with the devices that we're using, but also what does those platforms does with us? What does it do with man in particular? With toxic masculinity, and also how those platforms are interacting with us these days. And we use this framework of this novel by Goethe and tried a kind of set up to make a predominant discourse of nowadays kind of feelable and tangible. And this is actually what I'm trying to do with my work, that is using like big buzzwordy discourses and try to bring them somewhat to a embodied and practical approach. This is the second work that I want to go into. It's called Ocean Flight, and I did it here as part of a master thesis. in 2023, and we showed it also at Ars Electronica. It's a performance where we tried to put different inputs into a virtual avatar. And we're thinking about how digital community and also interaction with digital personas could look like, and kind of used a setup where we had a motion capture suit, music, a camera system, and different media inputs into one character. And we're thinking about how can we maybe break up this idea of a one-to-one representation of the self and the digital, not only as one user is playing or being one entity in the digital, but what happens when multiple inputs come together and play this virtual puppet. And from there, I went to like more educational work. This is part of my storytelling seminar that I'm doing at HWR Berlin, where I engage with students that study management and sustainable management, and we kind of thinking about how we can reframe the idea of what sustainability means, but also what organizational frameworks are and what business could be in the future. And part of this, I use future thinking, which is basically using scenario building as a practical tool to discuss certain issues that probably sometimes too big to discuss in the nowadays, but to project them to a future scenario. And we use the solar punk science fiction genre and asking the students to build little prototypes in a workshop framework of 3 to 6 hours. And out of this crafting, out of this building of those little prototypes, we discuss quite differently, more in a engaged, embodied way, those topics. A different workshop that I did was the future of movement, where we had in the first session introduction to Unreal Engine, which is a gaming software, and then through games and little workshop elements, we created those worlds and asked the students to come up with movement in that world and how this could look like and how this could change different elements of the world that they're living in. And now to 2 more works that I did recently. This one is called Real-Time Affairs, and it is actually a meet-up space and a event series where we invite artists from the performative and digital field to present their work to each other. And it's happened on a regular basis, and we always invite 2 artists presenting the work to each other. And the whole idea about this was that we thought it's more interesting actually to talk about processes rather than about products. And also here we engage with like a kind of a big network within Berlin and people who are interested in technology and art and also performance. And we're asking the presenters to show kind of behind the scenes and also tell their stories about how they're engaging with the technology that they're using. The last project I want to go into is a curational work that I recently did called Attention is All I Need, and it's happening at Tech Basel, a gallery in Switzerland, and we came up with a group show with 6 positions that presented their versions of self-representation in the digital, kind of very diverse ideas of how representation actually could look like, from data representation to self-avatars to only text to 3D models and so on and so forth. And here was also the idea to take a discourse and show it from very diverse and different perspectives, not only like finding like a common ground, but like multiple angles to discuss those. And yeah, going back to the initial idea of this panel and asking myself also, where does storytelling and future fiction actually come together? I came up with 3 different methods that accompanying my work. And the first is that I think the work of storytelling and also the work of future makes the abstract tangible. So we can create little objects, we can create theater pieces, we can create movements that kind of bring and make big buzzwordy constructs very tangible and discussable. The second is that in the work, and also what future thinking is actually promoting, is that future is like not singular, it's always plural. So we have from now on multiple versions that could exist. And I think in curating shows, that also highlighting multiple perspectives and plural works, we could also let those stand next to each other and kind of bring life to the discourse by letting them be next to each other. And the third is that in all the works, the moment of reimagining something is very, very important. And for me, always this moment of subjectivity and the way how we could like live together and create certain kinds of community. And there, I always are interested not in solely individualistic proposes or collectivity in general, but like the negotiation between those poles. Yeah, thank you very much. I was right at the time. If you're interested, there are some of my works on the website, but if you're interested also in the exhibition that is still running until 30th of May, you can take the QR code and have a look. Thanks.
Cheers, Jonny. Awesome. Any direct, brief questions directly to Jonny before I kick off our discussion round? Anyone? Other than that, yeah, I would have a question basically to all 3 of you. I mean, you all 3 work at the intersections of design, theory, imagination, and transformation, so to say, but all come from different perspectives towards those alternative worldviews or future fictions. So I would be interested, and maybe this could go into a discussion between you, how can this artistic, political, and strategic design perspectives learn from each other, focusing on these alternative worldviews, future fictions, and narratives you just introduced to us? Who wants to start?
I can start.
Yeah, of course.
So basically, one more thought also to adding to your presentation, which you just said. I think like the future, in terms of futures, exists in like their plural versions of possibilities, but then you have also the plurality of perspective, of perception. So basically, you have a double plurality of futures, which I think is quite interesting and important. And then just to relate in that and how this goes together also with what you said, I think like how I see this idea of differentiation and of terms, dystopia and utopia are also just 2 categories, and we tend to think in those. Like we think in capitalism, or we always think in these terms. And I think the concept that you've proposed, sort of like thinking in dystopias, because things look pretty bad, but then there might be something positive and interesting and good within this this framing and coming up with a term to describe this, this possibility space and this approach to engage with the future is quite interesting. And then going backwards, I think, it's not backwards, but continuing to what you were saying, it's just a reflection on that. These are still like categories and terms that you think in, and you've proposed the idea of sort of like embodied imagining, which I think is very fascinating, because I'm not sure about that. Maybe you have a response to that, but I'm wondering, like, if you imagine through your like embodied experiences, if you somehow able to think beyond these dominant categories, because you're not using sort of like your mind that much and more the other parts of your body. Yes, thanks.
Shall I? Yeah, this is maybe something where my theater background comes in pretty much, and I think also like it changes in my educational work when I work with students. It changes a lot when they're not engaging in a theoretical way, but in a practical embodied. I mean, this is like nothing new for the whole course of design computation. It's all about like how getting very fast to something that we do prototyping, like getting away from sitting together and discussing everything and nothing, but like coming to this point where we create something that also costs something for us as producers. It's like the much more personal and much more inconvenient moment to produce something that also brings in your personality and also and I think this is where it gets more interesting. It always gets more interesting when it but I think it needs also the other reflection level. It needs both that kind of communicating with each other.
I have two thoughts, I guess. So the first one, because so what you said, that making, what was it, abstract ideas tangible, right, through prototyping. And I think also thinking the other way around, that you have, or actually it's not the other way around. So what I want to say is actually that through science fiction, so if you're in the genre and in the narratives, you can really also learn a lot about design and maybe how to design in a good way, or also about inventions. And why I'm saying this is like the big tech bros from Silicon Valley, they have all read science fiction as when they were like little boys, I don't know, and they really refer to that right now. There's so many interviews, Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, yeah, and I read this and I read that, and this is such a misinterpretation actually of science fiction, because they miss all the social context and everything. So Jeff Bezos, for example, he said, yeah, he was inspired by Star Trek to colonize space. And I think, like, what about post-capitalism didn't you get, right? Because this is the Star Trek utopia, actually. And so I think this is really also something about, how can I say, about knowledge maybe, and about understanding, like having knowledge or knowing about what science fiction actually is about and how it can be misinterpreted, and then also know about where do these ideas come from, the inventions and also the social ideas. I think this is very enlightening. And the other thing is, this really reminds me of your talk about language and how does language get into computers and then in the discourse and how it is discussed. These are also, again, abstract ideas, and when you have science fiction, you can put this into really captivating, tangible stories. For example, there is a German science fiction author who is called Dietmar Dart. Maybe, I don't know if you know him. So he's in the scene, he's quite famous, and he published a new book just like a month ago. And it's very long, it has 1,000 pages, but it's it's quite, super original. And so, and what he does, he really tackles these questions you put in your talk, and he has, of course, characters and their protagonists and stuff, and the major protagonist, she wants to build a new machine, which makes all these forms of languages actually, better and wants to contribute to a better future with that. And it's also full of language theory. So I really was reminded in your talk about this book, and they really it's a conversation. They talk to each other. And this, I find super, super enriching.
Cool. There's a question from him.
My question doesn't tie into this, so...
Don't worry.
Okay, so I have a question that's not fully formulated. Well, thank you all, first of all, for your inputs. That kind of started coming up and now reshaped as you guys were talking. It came up in your the first input. And I was thinking about, I don't want this to become too epistemological or phenomenological, but also your understanding of language would be super interesting to me, because obviously language, what we use to communicate, or different kind of, programming languages when we're talking about computational systems and all of that, but also I was wondering about that because what happens when these limitations in language come into play, but also what happens when we think of the notion of embodied knowledge, in various cultures obviously around the world, where embodied knowledge is not only a mode of remembering, but it usually in a lot of different world views or cultures, it's both remembrance, but also going into the future. And it's a lot of the time, it's something maybe that is then transferred through different ways of performance, cultural practice, spiritual practice, and all of that. And so maybe also with your work, kind of thinking about the body and how we move the body, can that also be seen as a certain type of language, or what? Because I think that also obviously then comes into play. I don't know if that makes sense.
I can respond to that. With language, I also in this talk, I consider very broadly, including visual language, for example, and all kinds of, let's say, expressions that you can give meaning to in a way. And I think that if you have certain routines, for example, as embodied stored knowledge, this is something, you get socialized in and you observe and you adapt and transport. And once you understand it, or you feel you give meaning to it, then I would consider it as a form of language as well. I think that the interesting bit is here, I don't know if you could consider it as a category then, as a linguistic category. I'm not sure about that, but what matters here, and I think what is relevant in this discourse, is that there might be a certain form of reproduction. And if you reproduce certain practices without doing this reflectively, like the tech bros that you've just mentioned do, they don't reflect certainly what kind of conditions led to their thinking and what drives their crazy investments. This, might be is very problematic. So I think this kind of detecting reproduction in your own thinking and behavior, and maybe do things differently, or if you consider them as good, is what is important.
Thanks for the question. I think, there are different ways to analyze movement and also dance and theater. And of course, there are those who say everything is text, so everything is part of a certain kind of communication. But there are also others that say, maybe there is a chance that this is not a clear way of communication in the way we see communication is language in forms of some communication that can be decoded at a certain point. And I think especially the body and movement and performance could be so interesting. Also when it comes to formulate certain perspective and scenarios of the future, which are not always have to be decoded in the way they have proper meaning. They have a certain clear communication from one point to another. And I think this is also where sometimes those talking about utopias do also have like this problematic background. Of course, they were also used in repressive systems to communicate certain ideas in a very, so reduce complexity to simple narratives. And I think there's also the downside of storytelling and narratives, of course. We're like promoting this here very in a positive sense, but of course it does have also the other side where where storytelling is used to promote certain worldviews and also using them in propaganda senses to promote very clear visions of the future, which also like aligns with the whole idea of utopia and where also utopian visions are problematic.
Just one more thought to add on that. I think exactly that space that you're mentioning, where you don't have words, you don't have meaning, I think this is where it gets interesting.
Just one thing came to my mind. I think certainly this is also the space where it gets interesting, but also I mean, sorry, I'm always talking about science fiction because this is my topic, but what I think in science fiction also super interesting is that the futures that are depicted and the tech and everything can always be metaphorical. So actually the future in science fiction is a metaphor for something else. So a famous science fiction author, Ursula K. Le Guin, said that once, that I'm writing in metaphors and the future is a metaphor and I don't know for what, because if I knew it, I would write about that. So, and also, you know, a robot, for example, is a marginalized person and not like the technical entity of a robot. And then, yeah, I think it gets really interesting because then it's open for interpretation. So there's also, you know, a huge space of different meaning when you have, a lot of metaphors and they change, you know, like you can read now an old science fiction text and now you see different metaphors there. And this is also, enriching.
Any more questions from the audience? Take your chance. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, thank you for. It's a question for you for your take on science fiction, and I was wondering, and maybe I'm playing like the devil's advocate now, because when you were giving us this vision of anti-dystopian narrative, you. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you put like an emphasis on, okay, there are kind of like groups of people that that are maybe like small groups that are kind of like that are kind of in dire circumstances, but they are still fighting on, something like that. And so my question would be, is this not just like basically the narrative that kind of reconciles ourselves with like this kind of like neoliberalist kind of like dystopia that we are kind of like hellhole that, I mean, a lot of very not so much privileged people like us here are living in? Isn't like, okay, this is like you're in this kind of like multi-crisis universe and it's like, at least you can kind of like preserve some humanity and struggle. And would you not say that we might need like visions of collective action or kind of like something else that science fiction could give us than just kind of like reaffirm this, that maybe kind of like small groups of friends, the nuclear family is there for itself, we can fend for ourselves in the face of kind of like global clusterfuck and adversity.
Thank you. Fair point. So, is this working? Yeah, I don't know.
I think it is. Iman?
Okay. Absolutely fair question, but it doesn't have to be only a small community. I mean, the whole concept could also be like for a system change, of course. But the interesting thing is, so if we had a system change from a neoliberal system to another system, for example, then you still would find dystopian traits. And then again, you would find groups that need to act against that. So it's really a never-ending opposition, actually, against the negative things that are not just and that are not fair. So, but of course in the stories, also for dramatic reasons, of course, but for example, in Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry for the Future, which is like the huge book, there it is about global change, actually. So there you find all levels, individual and nation states, smaller communities, bigger ones, because the Ministry for the Future is actually it's an UN body. And there, yeah, this would be the example from literature against that. So it is actually incorporated in the whole setup, but of course for dramatic reasons in the books, of course it's mostly then smaller communities.
Nice. I think we have time. Perfect.
One last.
Well, you mentioned that it's a never-ending fight, right? And concepts like fairness are very relative, let's say. So don't we get stuck in a loop where we're just rejecting stuff? Like, what are we moving toward? Like, where is the optimism in that? That's my question. If it's like differently, like very separate from utopia, if it's a new concept, and it's not like some representation of utopia, then how is the positivity in that? Like, I see just a loop of rejecting.
Yeah, I think this is connects also to your question, kind of. I mean, the idea is not against utopia. So I can have, of course, utopian ideas, but if I want to really reach them and then I have this utopian society, then it gets dangerous, I guess. So this is, in fact, the idea. And I really don't think, and I think also history taught us that this point isn't reachable. And if a group of people says we can reach it, then it really gets anti-dystopian and a dystopia, actually. So I think it really is or let's say maybe it is a ongoing fight for utopian ideals, knowing that we cannot reach them.
Okay, I
think time for one last brief question before we continue the conversation at the bar.
Yeah, question to Markus or others too. I think the term anti-dystopia from the second presentations is a great example of what you're saying, like the alternative worldview. Like the dominant worldview is the dystopian view now, and if I speculated who is getting benefit from that dominant worldview is that probably the hegemonial power. So because like if everyone believes in the same like dystopian is inevitable, then it's more easier to control like people's behavior, whatever. And but like if we like promote anti-dystopian the worldview as an alternative worldview, then like there are more like diverse worldviews, and then you can more predict how do people react, think, and behavior. Then it's more like open up the possibility for the new alternative. And I think it's fine for practical sense or activist sense, but from the speculative sense, I have a concern about that some current this against of like dominant because like we are living in the world like anti-dystopian or post-capitalist or post-human, post-colonial. We are all like saying post-XYZ. Like I feel like it's like we are lack of imagination, and and I think it's easy to fall the trap. Like we are more like then obsessed to working against what we don't like, and like then we might forget what we really want to do, and just I would like to ask about question is about then, how about you think about that?
Yeah, thanks. I'm not completely sure if I understood your question correctly, but I think that this post-X always creates a connection to the thing that you had before, and it might be in ways problematic, where you want to sort of like detach the thing that you imagine from the existing reality. So I'm also like with that post-human, post whatever. I'm not sure if that's always a good idea and a good term, because people that believe in the opposite would always argue against it, just because you've used that term. So I think there might be moments where it just makes sense to use a term or to construct a term that has less meaning in it, and then the new meaning might emerge from it, like in that way. I'm not sure if that's answering your question.
I think with this, is it on? Yeah. I think with this we will end.
It's great material to catch up at the bar.
Yes.
I would say.
Thank you to all of our guests. So you three, please, everybody applause.
Warm applause.
Also, a big applause and a big thank you to our entire team and the rest of the studio for preparing the room for us and the technical stuff. And so also a big applause there.
Cheers, everyone.
And now we invite all of you to the bar, have a drink or 5, and continue the conversation. Thank you for coming and have a nice evening.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.